You know that feeling, right? When you get hit with a brilliant idea, maybe it's for a product, a service, even just a better way to do something at work. It's exciting.
Totally.
But then, I don't know about you, but for me, that excitement quickly turns into feeling completely overwhelmed. Like, where do you even begin? How do you turn this amazing idea into something real without, well, sinking a ton of time and energy into something that might not even work?
You're hitting on something really crucial there, the fear of wasting time and effort. It's so common.
Right. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We're diving into how to go from that initial spark to something tangible, something that actually has an impact. You provided some really insightful material that really gets at the heart of navigating that uncertainty. And our mission today is to pull out a framework, a set of tools that can help make that process so much smoother.
Absolutely. We've got The Lean Startup by Eric Ries on the table here. And it's a gold mine, honestly, for anyone facing that challenge of creating something new. Because it doesn't matter if you're aiming for a tech startup or just trying to innovate within your existing company, the principles are really universal. And that's what we're going to focus on today, not just summarizing the book, but extracting those actionable insights, those shortcuts, if you will, that let you test your ideas and learn what works, without getting bogged down.
I love that shortcuts, because I think that's what so many of us are looking for, right? The way to make this process a little less daunting, a little less overwhelming.
Absolutely. And that's what the Lean Startup is all about. It's a guide to turning ideas into progress. And the material you've given us really lays it all out in a clear way, covering all the key concepts, real-world examples, everything. So today, we're diving into those core principles, seeing how they apply to you, our listener. So no matter what your ambition is, no matter the scale, you'll walk away with a framework for taking your ideas and turning them into something real. So let's jump right in.
Let's do it. Rees starts off with a pretty bold statement, which is that when you're dealing with the unknown, the traditional rules of management, they kind of fall apart. They don't quite work the way we expect them to.
It's a really important point, right? Because what Rees argues is that startups, and really any project that's venturing into something new, operate under what he calls, and this is a great term, extreme uncertainty. And think about it, traditional management, it's all about efficiently executing a predefined plan. But when you're dealing with the unknown, when you're trying to create something genuinely new, the plan itself is full of these huge question marks.
Yeah, and it's not just startups either. I mean,
Right.
think about established companies trying to innovate, trying to create something that's never been done before. They're facing that same level of uncertainty. The ground is shifting beneath their feet just as much as it is for a brand new company.
Exactly. Reese's actually uses his early days at IMVU as a really vivid example of this. They poured a ton of resources into building features that they thought users would love, but it turned out those assumptions were totally wrong. And the result, well, it was a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted effort. And that really underscores the need for a different approach.
And it brings us to this question of how do we avoid that? How do we avoid pouring all that energy into something that ultimately misses the mark?
Right. How do we ensure we're building the right thing? And that leads us to Ree's broader definition of a startup. It's not just about size or funding. It's about this fundamental act of creating something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And he even uses Apple and the iPhone as an example, showing that even a giant company, when they're innovating, they're essentially operating like a startup.
Yeah.
Because they're venturing into the unknown. They're facing questions that nobody has the answers to.
Okay, so if we're accepting that uncertainty is a given, how do you even gauge if you're moving in the right direction? Because the typical metrics, like how many features you've shipped or how much money you've raised, those might not actually tell you if you're on the path to success. They're not necessarily reliable indicators, are they?
That's such a critical point. And it leads us to this concept of validated learning. Rees argues that in a startup environment, progress isn't about how much you produce, but about how much you learn. It's about understanding what your customers truly value, what problems they're actually facing, and what solutions they're willing to pay for.
So it's not about building the perfect product in isolation. It's about engaging with the real world, getting that feedback loop going.
Exactly. And that takes us to the heart of the lean startup methodology, the build, measure, learn feedback loop. It's this iterative process where you start by building a minimum viable product, or MVP, which is essentially the bare bones version of your product, just enough to test your key assumptions.
Okay, so the MVP, it's like a prototype. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be functional enough to get real feedback from real users.
Right.
and you don't waste time building unnecessary features, right?
Right. It's all about getting something out there quickly and then measuring how people respond to it. Do they use it? Do they understand it? Do they find it valuable? And then, crucially, you take that data and you use it to inform your next steps.
And it's not just about gathering any data, it's about focusing on those actionable metrics, the ones that actually give you insights into what's working, what's not working, and how to improve.
Exactly. And this is where Reese makes that crucial distinction between actionable metrics and vanity metrics. Vanity metrics, those are the numbers that might look impressive on the surface, like total website visits or app downloads. But they don't necessarily tell you how engaged people are or whether they're actually finding value in what you're offering.
It's like judging a book by its cover, right?
Yeah,
It might look flashy, but the content inside could be totally off.
exactly. Actionable metrics, on the other hand, those are the numbers that give you real insights into user behavior. They tell you if people are using your product the way you intended, if they're coming back for more, if they're actually finding it useful, and those are the metrics that should guide your decisions.
And so it's not just about having a lot of users, it's about having the right users, the ones who are genuinely engaged, the ones who are finding value in what you're creating. And that's how you build something sustainable, something that can actually grow.
And it's not just about growth for the sake of growth. It's about finding the right kind of growth, the kind that aligns with your goals and your values.
So let's talk about what happens when those initial assumptions, those leaps of faith, well, what happens when they turn out to be wrong? That must be a really difficult moment, right?
It can be, but it's also a crucial turning point in the lean startup journey. This is where the pivot or persevere decision comes in. And it's all about being honest with yourself about what the data is telling you. If your experiments are showing that your initial assumptions were off, then it's time to make a change.
And a pivot, it's not just a random change of direction, it's a structured course correction based on the evidence you've gathered, right?
Exactly. Ries outlines several different types of pivots, each addressing a specific type of mismatch between your assumptions and reality. You might have a zoom-in pivot where you realize a particular feature of your product is resonating more than others, so you double down on that. Or a zoom-out pivot where you realize your initial product was too narrow, so you broaden its scope. Or you might even pivot to a completely different customer segment. The key is to be flexible, to be adaptable, and to let the data guide your decisions.
And we see this in action with IMVU, right? They didn't start out as the company they are today.
Exactly. They started as a broader social networking platform, but they quickly realized that the part of their product that was really engaging users was the ability to customize avatars with virtual goods. So they pivoted, they shifted their focus to that specific area, and that became the core of their success.
It's a great example of how being willing to adapt, to let go of those initial assumptions, can lead to something even better than you originally imagined. And this whole process of iterative learning, it ties in really closely with the concept of small batches, something Ries borrows from the world of lean manufacturing. Can you talk a bit about how that applies to startups and product development?
Absolutely. So in traditional manufacturing, you often produce things in large batches, right? But if you discover a defect late in the process, it can be really costly and time-consuming to fix. And it's the same in product development. If you spend months building a huge, complex feature without getting any feedback along the way, you risk building something that nobody wants.
So small batches, it's about breaking down your work into smaller, more manageable chunks and getting feedback at each step of the way so you can course correct as you go.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding big mistakes, it's also about accelerating your learning. Because by working in small batches, you get that feedback loop going much faster, which means you can iterate and improve much more quickly.
And this ties back into that idea of reducing waste, right? Because you're not wasting time and energy building things that don't work. You're constantly testing, learning, and adapting.
Exactly. And it's not just about being efficient, it's also about being more responsive to your customers' needs, because as you're getting that feedback, you're getting a better understanding of what they're looking for, what they're struggling with, and what solutions they're actually willing to pay for. And that leads to more sustainable growth.
Okay, so let's talk about growth. Because once you've found something that's working, something that people actually want, how do you scale that? How do you take it to the next level?
That's where Ries's discussion of engines of growth comes in. He identifies three main engines. The sticky engine, which is all about retaining your existing customers and maximizing their lifetime value. The viral engine, which is all about getting your current users to spread the word and bring in new customers organically. and the paid engine, which is all about using advertising and marketing to reach new customers.
And each engine has its own set of strategies and tactics, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. The key is to understand which engine is best suited for your particular business and your particular goals, and then to focus your efforts on optimizing for that engine. For example, if you're relying on the viral engine, you need to make sure your product is inherently shareable. It needs to be something that people naturally want to tell their friends about.
Right. And we see this with companies like Hotmail back in the day with that classic "get your free email at Hotmail" tagline at the bottom of every email. That's a perfect example of viral marketing.
It's a great example of how a simple, built-in feature can lead to explosive growth.
So we've talked about building the right product. We've talked about finding the right kind of growth. But there's another crucial piece of the puzzle, isn't there? And that's building an adaptive organization, a company culture that embraces this whole idea of experimentation and continuous learning.
Absolutely. Because it's not enough to just have the right tools and the right processes. You need to have the right mindset. You need to create an environment where people feel safe to experiment, to fail, and to learn from their mistakes. And that's where techniques like the 5 whys come in. It's this incredibly simple yet powerful tool for getting to the root cause of problems. Instead of just addressing the symptoms, you keep asking why until you uncover the underlying issue.
And the goal isn't to place blame. It's to understand what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again. It's about creating a culture of continuous improvement.
Precisely. And it's not just about fixing problems, it's also about identifying opportunities. Because as you're learning from your mistakes, you're also gaining insights into what's working, what's resonating with your customers, and how you can build on that success.
And it's fascinating to see how these lean startup principles, which were initially developed for startups, are now being adopted by larger, more established companies as well, through things like innovation sandboxes, where they're creating these dedicated spaces for experimentation and rapid iteration.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because it shows that this isn't just a methodology for small companies, it's a way of thinking, a way of approaching innovation that can be applied at any scale. And we see this with companies like Intuit, which use these principles to develop successful products like SnapTax. They created a separate team, gave them the freedom to experiment, and they were able to build something truly innovative and disruptive.
So it's not just about the size of your company. It's about the mindset. It's about the willingness to embrace uncertainty and to learn as you go. And ultimately, it's all about minimizing waste, isn't it? It's about making sure you're focusing your time and energy on the things that actually matter, the things that deliver real value to your customers.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most powerful takeaways from the lean startup. It's about building a business that's not just about growth for growth's sake, but growth that's driven by a deep understanding of your customers' needs, your customers' problems, and your ability to solve them in a way that's genuinely valuable.
So let's bring it all together for you, our listener. We've covered a lot of ground today, but the core of the lean startup, it boils down to this. It's about learning through experimentation. It's about embracing the build, measure, learn feedback loop. It's about prioritizing validated learning over assumptions. It's about working in small batches, being flexible, and being willing to pivot when necessary. And it's about creating a company culture that embraces continuous learning and improvement.
And these principles, they're not just for startups, they're for anyone who wants to bring a new idea to life, whether it's a product, a service, or even just a new way of doing things within your existing organization.
And it's about remembering that uncertainty, it's not something to be feared. It's an opportunity. It's a chance to learn, to grow, and to create something truly meaningful.
Absolutely. And the beauty of the lean startup approach is that it gives you a framework for navigating that uncertainty, for turning those initial sparks of inspiration into something tangible, something that can have a real impact.
So as you're thinking about your own ventures, your own ideas, your own challenges, here's a final thought for you. What is the biggest leap of faith you're currently making? What is the most fundamental assumption that underpins your idea? And what is the absolute simplest experiment you could run this week, even a tiny one, to start validating that assumption and moving forward with confidence? Because the first step is always the most important one. And the lean startup methodology gives you the tools to take that step with clarity, with purpose, and with greater chance of success.
It all starts with that willingness to test, to learn, and to adapt. And the lean startup, it's a roadmap for doing just that.
I hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights, some new tools for your toolbox, and some inspiration to get out there and start building.
Me too. Because the world needs more great ideas. And the lean startup, it's a way to make those ideas a reality.
Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep building.